This is Studio Talk, and I'm Barry Johns. I recently watched a video on Dolby Atmos by another person who's also a studio owner as well as a YouTuber. His name is Josh Sewell, and his YouTube channel is Sewell Studios. He did what I thought was the very best comprehensive perspective from an audio engineer's perspective, but also kind of bringing in the consumer's perspective. The very best video I've seen on it, and really well thought out, and he did an outstanding job of getting his points across. He made several points there in his video that really got me thinking. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist or something like that, but something has not seemed right from the very beginning to me about this whole process and the way that it's unfolding. You would think at the end of the day that if something were so compelling, we wouldn't need it shoved or forced down us, right? I mean, if it's really that good, aren't the consumers naturally going to want it? So why is it this seems to be shoved down our throats? I can understand why audio manufacturers have a game in this, okay? They can ultimately sell more products. A speaker manufacturer's going to sell more speakers, all right? Obviously, online dealers are going to sell more products related to this. So that's just part of it. And so when I say corporate grab, I'm not talking about those folks. I'm talking about the powerful people in this world that seem to be the ones behind it. And what is it exactly they have to gain by all of this? I think if there's anything we've learned about major corporations is they simply use us like pawns so they can make more money. So let's start out with some fundamental aspects that he touched on in this video. And we're going to go through a couple of different points to really, for me to be able to lay my perspective on all of this together for you. I want to thank you, Josh, for doing your video. It was outstanding. And although I walked away from it probably in a way that you didn't anticipate that I would, it certainly got my mind thinking. And I'm curious if anyone else out there thinks the same way. So let's start with topic number one for my take on his video, and let's talk about the artist. Let's see what he has to say about the potential artists who are doing their own music, promoting their own music, non-record label associated folks, who are coming to their local studio and ultimately hiring them to be able to record their music. What is it they want out of all of this?
And I reached out to the artist and said, hey, I'm going to start doing some Atmos mixes. Would you be interested? And they both were basically like, no, thanks. And I'm like, hey, I'm not trying to upsell you on anything. I'm actually going to do these for free because it's new to me and I'm learning. And they checked into what it would cost extra for the distribution. And they were just like, hey, I appreciate it, but we just don't want it right now.
So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And that's a perspective, quite honestly, I didn't even consider before. So now we've got the artist being put in a position to where if they go down this rabbit hole, it's going to cost them more money, ultimately more money. Now here we have Josh who's willing to actually do this for free. You wouldn't imagine that most folks out there are willing to do that, and it's certainly not long term. So from an artist perspective, they're seeing the potential of this not only costing more for distribution, but also costing more to have their music mixed. Now we'll touch on that just a little bit later in the video. Next up, what we're going to talk about is your studio compatible with Dolby Atmos? In other words, is your interface the right interface? Do you have enough speakers? How much are you going to have to invest? And is your studio space even practical for an Atmos mixing environment? Let's see what he points out about this.
We just don't want it right now. And so I was like, oh man, that's weird. You'd think you're getting excited about something, you would just assume that excitement would kind of flow through society. And I didn't find that to be the case at all. At that time, I was just going to do it on headphones because, again, I had no idea if I even liked it. I only liked it on like 2% of everything that I checked out. And so I'm not going to change my whole setup and buy all these speakers and everything, but I did do a hypothetical pricing out. I would have to get a new interface because unfortunately my Lynx Aurora 16s and my Avid HDIO 16, at least to my knowledge to this day, are still not Atmos compatible. Those were both going to be between like $3,000 and $4,000, depending on, buying used or the best deal you could find. And then the most unobtrusive and most affordable speaker brand that I could find that I had heard before that I had some trust with was the IK Multimedia iLoud series. To get those was going to be another $4,000 to $5,000. So we're easily $10,000 in now to just have a bare bones Atmos setup. I can't drop $10,000 on this. I have no idea if this is going to stick around for starters. And I'm going, oh man, you're looking at these setups that are $50,000, $60,000 for a Atmos speaker setup.
All right. So we're talking about just getting in the door with it. We're talking about the bare bone basics of it. Whether or not you agree with his interface choices or his speaker choices, that's not the point. It's going to require a significant investment by your local studio because this whole digital world that we live in, things that enable a guy like me to sit at home and have all of this and be able to record my own music and really record it at a high level has changed so much. And it's already put so many of your local and regional studios out of business for good. So the ones that are left, they're not exactly making the money from what they did back in the heyday. All right. They can have, as long as they've got a good reputation and they've got enough clientele behind them, they can make a profit. But I can assure you, most of them are not making a ton of profit doing this if they're focused in the world of audio. Somebody like Josh, as an example, does a lot of video and post-production work as well if you check out his website for his studio. So, for the local audio guy, what does this mean? It's going to even pinch him even further. And we don't even know if it's going to take off. But let's say for the sake of discussion, all of this is going to be forced down our throats, whether we like it or not. And we're going to have to just embrace it because there's too many powerful people at work here. But ultimately, ask yourself, is it compelling enough for the end consumer? That's a very questionable thing. So now you've got the additional expense of bare bones having to get into this. That's a lot of money that, quite frankly, your local studio owner simply is not likely to be able to afford. And the question becomes, is there going to be an ROI associated with it? In other words, are they going to get a return on that investment? So let's see kind of what Josh has to say about that, and then we'll continue from there.
We have the issue of the interface cost, whether or not yours is compatible or if you have to buy something new. We have the issue with the physical placement of the speakers in a room because my room and most people's rooms were not created with Atmos in mind because it wasn't a thing yet. And we have the issue of artists not being interested, at least that I was working with. And then we go all the way down the line to the consumer, the listener. And I found less interest there than I found with the artist. And I was asking around to some other engineers and, I have a couple buddies in Nashville that were like, man, we might be able to get maybe like $1,250 additional on a mix for an Atmos version. Well, then it was $500 and then it was $350 and then it was about $250. And then it was like, we're having a hard time getting the labels to pay anything extra. They expect an Atmos mix to just be delivered with the stereo mix.
All right, so I guess that answers a question about return on investment. Now, we're going to assume that his numbers are correct and they're pretty universal, but we all know how this goes. Ultimately, if that's not the case for everybody out there, it will become the case for that. So not only do you have to make a significant investment considering the cost of operating a local studio, you got to make a significant investment in infrastructure, obviously capital investment and additional equipment, to be able to do it. And then on top of that, you're not going to make any more money from it? Well, next, here's where my conspiracy thought kind of comes in. If that's the case, is that going to get you more artists coming to your studio? Is that where your return on investment is going to be? That they need to come to your studio to be able to do it? Or is this something else? So let's talk about Apple, and happen to be a very big Apple fan, by the way. I know there's a lot of haters, and when they're haters, they're big time. But I've always enjoyed Apple products. But let's face it, they're in business to make money, and they stand to benefit by doing this. If you don't think they've got some technology they're working on right now in the pipeline that's going to be able to take advantage of this later on, I think you'd be kidding yourselves. We all know that if anybody's going to come out with something, they're likely to come out with these kinds of things first. And ultimately, again, this is not about the experience. The experience could be over the top amazing. That's not the point of this. The whole point is, if it was that compelling, why is it being forced down our throats? Well, here's the bigger side of it. If your local studios can no longer be able to stay open, to be able to provide these services at a cost, and what's that going to mean for the artist? You've got a lot of artists today that are really changing the way and have changed the way the entire recording industry worked. No longer are these big fat cats sitting in big chairs taking 85 cents out of every dollar of every recording and then forcing the artist to have to pay most of what they made back due to production costs and marketing costs and promotion and all that stuff. We've all heard the horror stories about how these people just sucked the blood out of every artist along to the point the only way they could make any money is by touring. So what do they stand to gain by all of this? Well, if you can't go to a local studio to get your music recorded, and if Sony and ultimately Spotify and Apple won't allow your music to end up on any playlist that's going to get any kind of circulation unless it's Dolby Atmos, where does that leave you? Back at the mercy of the recording companies, not the recording companies, the record companies. It's going to leave you at their mercy again. That's where I think this is nothing but a power grab of greed. They're going to fight tooth and nail to get back to the way things used to be. They don't like this idea that you can become a YouTube sensation, produce and record your own music, bypassing their old school model. They don't like that one bit. And that's why I think this is being shoved down our throats. Again, it could be the greatest thing ever invented, but the greatest thing ever invented doesn't need to be shoved down our throats. We shouldn't need to feel forced to do any of this. So I am very suspicious. If you like the things I talk about, do me a favor. Leave some comments down below and subscribe to the channel. Leave some comments either way. There's a lot of outrage about this. I've done several videos on Atmos so far, but this was the first one that really went ding, 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 ding. Even though Josh didn't mean to necessarily get this idea in my head, it certainly hit, and it felt like a sledgehammer when it hit me. I said, I think I finally got this. I've got this. There's a lot of outrage about this. A lot of it out there. Overwhelmingly 90, I can't give you actual statistics, but I bet you 99% of all the comments that I've gotten, as well as other YouTubers have gotten, have been negative this whole process. Yeah, you'll get your supporters in there. You'll get them. And like I said, I'm not saying whether you should or should not support the idea of this technology, but I think we should all be suspicious about how and why exactly and what the end game is, because there's always an end game. Until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.